All right, thank you. So let me start with a very quick. Okay, it was a really quick video, but this is that I call a stress testing. So let me explain to you what you've just seen and how it's related to what I'm going to talk. So about a month ago, I was in Rwanda, and there we have a project that basically we developed a medical record system that could be used in rural Rwanda, basically allowing nurses to help mothers with HIV or that might have high risk for HIV and their babies. Basically, this is a system that needs to work also offline for many days for the mothers and their babies. They are coming and they are taking different measurements for the children, height, weight, circumference of the arms, basically trying to see the malnutrition children and giving some family consulting to the mothers. And what you've seen, this is basically this kind of session, how it looks. About 150 different mothers and their babies are coming to a health center. And when I say are coming, I mean literally walking for hours to arrive to the health center, sitting in this tiny room with all the crying babies, and the nurse just one by one, there is not like one room with the privacy, are coming to the nurse. And I was centered, this is a project that we're building, it already exists for 2 years, but that was the first time I saw it in the field. And as I was looking at the nurse working on the tablet with that thing, basically adding the measurements, and you heard all the crying babies, I call it stress testing, like a real life stress testing. One of the notions that I had was, I'm so happy she doesn't have a runtime exception. Because we are developers and we know how it is. And one of the things that I saw, for example, one page was loading quite slow. Like I'm talking, 20 seconds slow. Now, usually when I hear it as a business owner that the client has a page that loads in 20 seconds, I really don't care. I honestly, that's how I work. I don't care. I mean, okay, we'll fix it. So somebody cannot submit a support form and it takes 20 seconds. But when you see something like that, and if there would have been a runtime exception, then I would feel very bad for that nurse and for all the mothers that we have. So from there, I want to move and start talking about this thing called Elm. So just to understand a bit the audience, who here is or was a JavaScript developer by a show of hands, or touched JavaScript in their life? Okay, a few people. Out of those people who raised their hands, or in general, do you feel that you mastered JavaScript? Like you understand exactly what's going on? Nobody's raising their hand. Are some people frustrated with JavaScript out of the people who are doing? You're not frustrated, or you're not?
I'm not frustrated.
Okay, that's good. That's good for you. So, oh, it didn't move here. Sorry. Up. All right. So I'm gonna share with you my own experience, and basically my life goal in the past 5 years, ever since I've been using Elm, is try to persuade Matteo to also use Elm. So basically, I'm following every place he's going, every kind of Drupal camp and everything, and I'm always presenting about Elm. So, Matteo, maybe this time I will get to you. So Elm is its own language. It's called a functional language. What does it mean? Again, we don't really care right now. The idea is that it compiles into JavaScript, but it brings several guarantees. The guarantees are 0 runtime exception, and another guarantee, and I don't know if it's a guarantee or kind of a promise, is that it's a delightful language to work with. And I want to show you a bit how we're working in Elm and how Elm forces us to think. So I'm going to show you a really amazing application. I don't know if you've ever seen something like that, but this is something we're able to do with Elm. Ready? This is a counter example, which starts with 0. It has a plus mark, and it has a minus. I assume you can imagine what it's going to do. When I'm going to click on the plus, it's going to increment. When I'm going to click on the minus, I'm going to decrement. Nobody is confused up until now, I assume. So I'm going to move to the code, and I'm going to show really rapidly what does an Elm, how does Elm look, and then we're going to see how Elm forces us or encourages us to think. So it's not going to look very JavaScripty. It's not going to look very HTML-y. But if you've done any of those, it should look a little familiar. So I'm going to say this is my model. I'm going to import a different bunch of libraries. And here I define my model. In this case, again, we're taking a very simple application, the idea of a counter application. My model is one single thing. This is an integer. To the model, I can assign only an integer, only a number. If I try to pass it a string, the compiler, it's a compiled language, the compiler will scream at me. There's not going to be a runtime exception because it's just not going to compile. So here I say, this is my model, and my empty model, I'm going to start with a 0. That's the initial state of my application. Then Then the next interesting thing that I'm going to have here is I'm going to define what are the different messages, meaning what kind of interaction can the model undergo. Meaning, in order to change the state of my model, I'm either going to be able to decrement or increment. That's it. I'm not being able to, I cannot multiply it by 2 or something like that. Everything is very explicit. If you've been using React, and you have this idea of action stores and stuff like that, that's actually, a lot of it is influenced from Elm itself, from the Elm architecture, what we call. The update function, this is basically, I would say, kind of the brain where the business logic is happening. Over here, you can see that this is a typed language. I'm going to get a message, I'm going to get a model, and then I'm going to return a new model back. So this is a functional language. Everything is immutable. I got something, I return something back. Right now, let's ignore the command message. So basically, what the function is saying, listen, in case I got decrement, return a new object, which is this model, which is model -1, and the same model +2 in case of increment. That's it. Meaning whenever, if I have a bug somehow in this small application of when I'm incrementing, suddenly it increments 2 instead of 1, there can be only one single place it's going to happen, in the update function. It cannot happen in the HTML function, or it cannot happen in the view function or anything, because this is unidirectional, right? I'm basically I'm telling the model, listen, the application, listen, I have this model which is now 0, I want to increment it. What do you do about it? Right now I'm just saying model +1. I could have said, listen, only once a month, in the beginning of the month, I want you to increment it by 1, otherwise do nothing. Then surely everything, all the logic, will sit in one single place. And then in the end, we have the view function. Again, it's not HTML, but you might recognize the word div and button. So basically, those are functions. So in case I would write a div instead of div, dov, and I have a typo, again, I won't have a runtime exception, or I won't have some weird HTML, because Elm will, it will bark, it will scream, it will tell me, you have a problem here. I don't know what dov is. Did you mean div? So that was a really quick intro into Elm in the sense of how it looks, but that's not the point that I want to pass on. The point I want to pass on is kind of how those Elm coming with the type system, which we'll dive a little into, how it helps us shape the way we look into different problems. So we've discussed Contenta CMS earlier. I was looking at different examples of Contenta. One of the nicest one that I found was an Angular implementation by a guy named João from Portugal. And what we can see here on the top, we have the images, we have the title, the name of the recipe. In 1 out of the 3, we have the difficulty level, we have the time it's going to prepare, and then the view recipe. Now, I'm going to show some problems I see over here. Again, I've mentioned this guy. I don't know him. I think he's done a terrific work. But we do see a problem that, what are those recipes? Is it easy? Is it difficult? Is it unknown? Why don't we see anything over here? Again, most of us or some of us are developers, so we know that probably there is some null value which is printed and is not showing anything. So what I want to show is how I would approach into that problem in Elm and how we call it in the Elm community, how I would model the problem. So this is my recipe. And I want to start showing, and maybe together we can come up with ways of improving this idea of the model. We're just going to talk about model. That's the only thing that we're going to do, because in a way, and we know it also from developing also in PHP, you don't start with how the HTML will look. Oh, maybe you can do it in parallel. You kind of think about the data structure. How do we have the content? Who is referencing who? Which kind of fields do we have? Same thing we should and can apply in the front end. So how would the recipe look? Here I have a type alias recipe. The type alias basically means I have a record with different properties, and each property has some type related to it. So I have the title. It can be only a string. If I'll pass it a number, just a 0, I don't know what it is. Again, the compiler. An image, it's a string. Let's say that's the URL. And the preparation time would be an integer. Right? That's maybe the most basic recipe. We really haven't seen any new types over here. We're just using the regular types or the core types the Elm gives us. So I'm going to give you a types 101 in Elm functionality. This is how a Boolean is defined in Elm core. It can either be false or it can either be true, and that's it. You cannot pass it your name or anything. That's how it's defined. That's it. You almost learn 99% of the types in Elm. Let's see how we can take that and use it here when we're modeling the problem. So maybe we can define our own type, call it difficulty level, say it can either be easy, either be normal, either it can be hard. And then over here in my recipe, along other things, I would say I have a new property called difficulty level, which is of type difficulty level. Now, the minute I've done it, I like the example that we've seen a few slides ago. It is now completely impossible for me to define a recipe and forget to put the difficulty level. It will just not compile. So immediately by having this definition of the difficulty level, and so I have 100% guarantee that every recipe inside my application will have that information. Another way of looking at types and understanding their value is, let's say in our recipe, okay, think about your React or Vue application. Let's say we would like to define kind of, is it for vegans, is it vegetarian, is it for carnivores, right? So it's pretty natural for us in such case to define 3 different properties, which will be Booleans, right? Is carnivore Boolean, is vegetarian, is vegan. And then you tell yourself, I just need to be disciplined. I just need to make sure that only one of them will get a true. But we know that as disciplined as we are, oftentimes that's not the case. And somehow in my application, when it's running, I got this, I'm creating a new thing, a new recipe, which I'm calling I'm confused, because I can see that both is carnivore is true and is vegan is true. How did we reach this state? Well, we're developers, we know how it is. We've done a mistake, the content editor done a mistake. That's the reality. That's the reality of things. How can we solve it? Now, with the Elm type system, we have a thing called making impossible states impossible. This is an impossible state, right? I'm saying it's impossible, but it happened in reality. Somehow I got this. Again, if you reflect on some of your application, I'm sure you've seen similar cases. So basically with the type system, I would like to define maybe something like that. I defined that I have some dietary restriction, maybe I'm carnivore, either vegetarian, either vegan, and then my recipe would have, dietary restriction can have one single dietary restriction. Meaning that right now when I want to define my recipe, I'm going to say it equals vegan. I just made, by modeling correctly, I just made the bug. Just think how many times you have, not even in your JavaScript, in your PHP code, check is not empty, is carnivore, and is not empty, is vegan, and you do a different checks. Right now, just by defining it correctly, we've eliminated a bunch of different bugs that could have happened. Are you persuaded yet, Matteo, or I'm going to continue. Maybe this one will get you. So I've gone into a single recipe. And I can see I have now a preparation time and also a cooking time. It makes sense. I mean, I need to cook this pizza or whatever it is. So right now I have to start thinking, how do I define this new cooking time that we have, right? So I'm saying, I have a preparation time, it's going to take me 15 minutes of, making the dough, and then 25 minutes of putting it in the oven. Although if I'm preparing ice cream, it doesn't really make sense to put the cooking time. There's no cooking time. So if we were in JavaScript land, then I would ask you, and I'm actually asking you, what would I write in a cooking time when I don't have a cooking time? And probably there are two answers. One of them is null, and the other would be 0. And which one is better? I don't know myself. What have you been, would you write, Bob, for example?
I'd write 0.
You'd write 0? Why, by the way? I would think null, but why would you write 0? Because there's 0 cooking time?
Right, that just makes sense to me, and then I have one type that's simple.
All right. So what's interesting about it is that you actually say, when I'm saying I have 1 minute of cooking time, I'm thinking, okay, I turn on the oven. Okay, let me go, turn on the oven. Oh, I have 1 minute, I put it in. And with 0, I turn on the oven, I wait for it to heat up, and then I come and say, oh, there is 0. Okay, I'm going to put it outside. So basically what happens is, with Bob 0, I'm just going to call it, is we don't really define correctly the intention of that thing. Now, I wouldn't, like if we would say null, I would say, but what is null? Right? So when we come and think about it in Elm world, again, we have this idea of types and trying to better articulate our intention of what we have. And again, we are seeing it a lot in PHP world, we see it a lot in JavaScript world. Let's say that we would have used null over here, and this, again, we've seen it many times, or even worse, sometimes it's 0, sometimes it's null. We have the not empty checks. I know it from my own models in PHP, checking over and over and over again, is it not empty, is it not empty, is it not empty? I don't know, it should not be empty, then why am I checking it all the time that it's not empty? Because it's PHP. I cannot know for sure that it's not empty, and I don't want to have a notice. So with Elm, we have this notion of a maybe value, which is pretty amazing in the sense of just by saying this is maybe, I immediately inform the entire application that you can either have, she, it, he, I don't know. The application can either have a cooking time, the recipe, pardon, can either have a cooking time or maybe does not have a cooking time. Or maybe, and now there's something interesting, I can think of saying, listen, there's 0, like there's no cooking time, there is cooking time, and maybe there is a 0 cooking time, which is it's by itself, just putting it near the oven and then removing it. But I immediately inform the application. I'm just saying, cooking time is a maybe integer. And then I know whenever I'm writing any function that I can either have it or not have it. And the compiler will not let me just assume that I have that thing. So if I have an ice cream, for example, preparation time is 10 minutes, but the cooking time is actually nothing. Surely I have no cooking time. And if I'm making this delicious pizza, then the cooking time will be just 15. That's how I say it. That's like the opposite of nothing. Nothing is nothing, and just is like wrapping the value, which happens to be the integer. Okay, that's the maybe integer here on top. Another approach that I could have taken, again, I'm just showing another level of typing. We actually saw it in the maybe example, is I could have said, listen, this whole idea of different times that we have, preparation time and cooking time, I want to have it under one single property. I want to hold everything. And actually, I'm starting to model, again, I don't want to over-engineer it, but maybe there is, some recipe for somebody who is really lazy, who doesn't want to prepare anything, and the recipe is just basically open the refrigerator and take your bagel out. So maybe I could model it a little differently and say, in preparation time, maybe I have a recipe that has absolutely no preparation time. Again, I don't want to call it preparation time equals 0. Because also in my UI, I don't want to show preparation equals 0. I would probably want to write no preparation. And I don't want to, in my UI, start checking if preparation equals 0. I just have different types to describe it. So for me as a human, I better understand what's the meaning over here. So I have no preparation, all right. Or maybe I have a preparation that basically holds two different numbers. The first one is the integer, that's the preparation time, and the second is the cooking time, which will be a maybe integer. So this time our recipe will have preparation times, it's holding the type, and then the ice cream from the refrigerator, again, we see it will be a no preparation versus preparation 10 and just 15. Again, we don't see any interaction right now. It's completely static, our application. It's non-existent. But just notice, self-reflect, just notice yourself how you're thinking about this problem and how to model it. If I would have looked into a view function, meaning I would like to return some HTML from that, again, just let's remember how our type is looking. It will look something like that. I'm doing what we call pattern matching. I'm saying case recipe preparation time is no preparation, return this text. Otherwise, if I have a preparation type, but the second value is nothing, then I say it takes this and that minutes, but there's no cooking. Or otherwise, here you can see I'm just basically unwrapping the cooking time out of the value, and I have the text. So it's very explicit. I could not have removed those lines because Elm would, again, scream at me, tell me you have non-exhaustive pattern matching. You forgot one case. So it kind of forces me to be a better developer and make sure I tackle all those things. By modeling the problem, I help the compiler help me in writing those, in finding those errors. By having this maybe integer instead of going with a 0, for example, I tell it, listen, if you see that I forgot that I might not have a cooking time, or for the developer that will start working in the project in 6 months that doesn't know all the different interactions that we have in the application, make sure that they know that they might not have a cooking time. Now, this is not a trick question. I'm honestly asking. If we would have to think to model the different states of an HTTP request, what kind of states do we have for a request from beginning until we got it? So, Matteo, what are the different states? Do you know HTTP? Have you heard about HTTP? So, can you help me model the idea of different states of HTTP, meaning from the minute you open the application to the second, it got all the requests back? It's not a trick question, so. All right, so I would say that there are 4 different states. Let me help you. Again, it's not a trick question. One of them, okay, I'm going to help you. One of them, for example, is I got a successful response.
Okay.
What would be another?
Connecting. When you connect.
Okay, you're in flight. You're like you're doing the request. Is that what you're saying? You're sending the request. You just didn't get an answer yet.
That would be, I would call that sending.
Sending, perfect. All right. So we said we're now sending the request. That's one state. I gave you one which is a successful response. What would be another one? Waiting is like you're sending right now, right? You're already sending. It means you're waiting. Okay, so one is successful. Let me give you a hint.
Failed.
Are all requests successful in the internet? Failed. Right. And this is, again, one of the things that I know that as a developer, when I used to write Angular application, which is the reason why I moved to Elm, maybe, is that I didn't like it, is so many times I wasn't disciplined, and so many times I was telling myself, and I'm sure that some of you in the crowd are also like that, what are the possibilities that the HTTP request will fail and you'll take action on it? So sometimes you're just saying, okay, if it's going to fail, it's going to fail, and whatever. I'm going to have an exception. So we said we're sending success and failure, and there's one more state, which is this is, for me, this is kind of the response that I got. Another state is I didn't do anything. Like when I just opened my Angular, React, whatever Elm application, I still didn't ask. I'm about to ask. I'm going to issue the HTTP request in 1 millisecond, but I still didn't do it. So again, this is way of modeling. Again, there's no real problem maybe here, or there is a problem of how do I describe my application, what's the state of my request. So we actually have a type, we have different libraries for Elm. One of them is kind of abstracting it, is what we call a type web data, or a remote data, we can call it as well. And basically we're saying, listen, we have those 4 different states. One is not asked, meaning I didn't ask for it yet. One is loading, meaning I'm what we call sending. I'm sending the request. The other is a failure, and the response of the failure can be only an HTTP error, a different type that describes all the different HTTP error types that we might have. And then we have a success of an A. The A describes here whatever kind of type or record or anything that you're going to pass on is going to be in the success. So let's say that in our recipe right now, I would have wanted that the preparation time would come from a web from a different service, a different web service. So basically, Contenta serves you the recipe, the title, the image, and everything, and then it's going to call a different service who's going to calculate the preparation times. In that case, I just need to model differently. I'm saying, oh, it's coming from a different service, meaning I'm going to have, like, I'm going to send a request, I'm going to return something. What? So I'm going to wrap these preparation times we prepared earlier with a web data. So that's how the view preparation time is going to look right now. I'm going to pattern match on the preparation time, which now is a web data. If it's a failure, just show error loading. If it's a success, then I'm going to pattern match on the value it got here. I got now the value of the actual preparation time, and then what we saw earlier, no preparation time with cooking or without cooking. Or I can tell it, listen, if it's loading or it's not asked, just show me a spinner or just say that it's loading. I could not have forgotten to add this part. I could not have written my application saying, take care only of failure and success. No, I must take care also about not ask and loading. The system is forcing me to be a better developer and do something about it. Maybe the do something about it is ignore it. But I think the compiler, along with the type system, forces me to acknowledge there could be a problem with the request, and I would get a failure. Moving forward a bit, we're going to slightly leave the types, and I'm going to show you two examples of the things that I think what people are calling the barrier of entry. From my perspective, personally, for me, working with JavaScript in terms of a learning curve was much higher than in Elm. I'm more used to I used to be more familiar with JavaScript syntax and JavaScript concepts, so I'm going to show you some of the things that were a bit, or not a bit, were difficult for me in the beginning, and then I'm going to show you. So let's look at the list of ingredients. Let's say that in my application with Elm, I would have wanted to show not only the list of ingredients. Let's say I would hold for each ingredient also its price, right? Peeled plum tomatoes, $10, 1 tablespoon of, I don't know, $0, right? It doesn't have to have anything. And I would like to show you also the total of the price of how much it's going to cost you the ingredients. So we see here a list of ingredients. How would a single ingredient look? What kind of information do I need to have about the ingredient? I'm asking, you're answering, maybe? Not a trick question. If I have one single ingredient, I want to show what's the name of the ingredient and its price. How many properties am I going to have on that single ingredient? Maybe, okay, but I'm gonna keep it easier even. I just want to show the title, and I just want to, the title will hold the quantity. I just want to show the title itself and the price. Again, not a trick question. What I want to have is I'm going to define, I have a single ingredient, it has a name, which is a string, and it has a price, which is an integer. We could have made it more elaborate and have our own currency type and whatever, but let's keep it simple. And then the recipe would have a property called ingredients, which is going to be a list of ingredients. As simple as that. By doing so, I've just told Elm, listen, the recipe surely is going to have a list of ingredients. I don't know if it's going to be an empty list or not, because I'm not telling it it's a non-empty list. It's just a list. And then what I want to show you is this idea of map and fold. You might have seen it also in JavaScript world, and how to think of those things. So it's just going to be one example. Those two functions. How would I write the function to view the actual ingredients? So I would want to put it in a UL and a LIs. So I define it over here. I have a function called UL. Again, if I would have a typo, the compiler will not compile it. I'm going to say, all the UL, I have a UL, wrapping it, and now I want to have a bunch of LIs. So what do I have? I want to basically map over the list of ingredients that I have, take them one by one, and print their information. So if I have a list of 10 ingredients, the result of mapping over here, of mapping over it, would be a list of 10 text, 10 names of the ingredients, a list of 10 different rows of the price. I decide what I have. But with mapping, what's important to understand is the number of elements that I have, the resulting list that I get is the same one. So basically I'm saying, here, please map all the ingredients that you have in the recipe. And I have now this anonymous function, this lambda function, which is getting as an argument one single ingredient. And that one single ingredient, I'm basically returning, and I'm saying, return back an li which prints the name of the ingredient. That's the mapping. I don't know. I don't want to call it simple. It took me quite a lot of time to figure it out, but this is what we have. In Elm, we don't have this notion of now breaking. Let's say I've reached 7 ingredients I want to break. If I'm starting the mapping, if I'm starting to iterate over it, it's going to iterate over everything. Now we have the notion of folding. Let's say I want to have the total price of all my ingredients. Right? It wouldn't make sense to use the map because we said we have 10 ingredients, I'm going to have a list of 10 prices, but that's not what I want. I want the amount. So I get my recipe, and then I'm going to fold L, meaning folding from the left, from the beginning of the list. I have the recipe ingredients that I'm going to fold over. I have this thing called accumulator, basically the default value that I want to start with. And then I get, again, in my anonymous function, I get an ingredient. I get my accumulator, and I'm saying the accumulator which started in 0 plus the ingredient price. So every ingredient that we get, we basically increment by the price that we have, and we can print it. And now there is a certain leap of faith that one has to do from those simple or, I don't know, small examples into knowing. I'm going to show really, really quickly just examples of application without talking about the application itself, but basically saying that whatever we were able, and I assume maybe you as well, we were able to do with Angular, with React, we're now able to do with Elm. It compiles to JavaScript. There's only one way of doing it. The only difference that we have, at least from my personal experience in the past 4.5 years, is that I actually enjoy writing those JavaScript applications. The second is I actually know what to do next, and I don't end up with spaghetti code. And even if I end up with spaghetti code, I'm able to do really huge refactors without much fear because the compiler is there to assist me. So from application working on very UI-ish things like kind of PowerPoint application that the teacher can have a classroom, a lesson with kids having their own computer, and they start a lesson, and with Pusher we're sending a real-time notification to the different students, into different applications that we have which are completely decoupled. Drupal in the backend, Elm in the frontend for managing different catalogs, to hybrid solutions. So this is a stamp collection selling site. It's being served by Drupal. This is search API in work. We have filtering and facets going on over here, but the login, for example, block is its own tiny Elm application or widget. This part over here would give me some information or the possibility to bid, to place a bid on this stamp is also Elm. So basically I end up with, 20 different widgets on the same page. That can be done, truly it's being done with different JavaScript application. I'm showing that it's possible to do it with Elm, and in a way, after those 4.5 years of doing that, I actually, and that might sound a little weird, I actually feel more confident about my front-end code than my backend, because I have those guarantees of the types and of the compiler. A way for me to kind of evaluate Elm in the early days that I've started was basically mimic a typical completely decoupled application that we have. So that's something I've done like 4 years ago, where you would, this is with a Drupal 7 backend with the RESTful model, you would be able to log in and see, a map with different content that I'm getting. I'm able to filter it. It's using companies, which in the backend it's actually organic groups, just because. And I'm able to filter and to see the markers and click and get the information. And again, for me, that was a completely new feeling of writing a demo application that, in fact, was more stable, and I felt more confident about it than application that we had in production. To the fact that we've also many times replaced Form API. We do use Form API when it makes sense, but in order to streamline the UI or UX of different sites, we do use JavaScript forms, including uploading files with drop zone and showing them, and all the interaction one could have with RESTful. Another way, one of our developers had to do in one of the sites that of the UN that we are building, they wanted some photo gallery by Flickr, and it kind of, the way Flickr works is you do need to have a few requests. You need to get the user, and from there you need to get the images. So basically there was a really tiny amount of interaction going on. It could have been done with jQuery, I suppose, but with Elm, I didn't have to think about the resulting HTML. It all started with that developer, Mariano, coming to me and say, okay, I have this task, and immediately I told him, okay, just model the problem. Tell me how you would construct your model. We had a discussion around that, and once the model was clear, everything else was kind of implementation details. Like once the model is correct, there's kind of only one way probably with Elm, which is very opinionated on moving forward. So we discussed this is a Drupal site. Embedding Elm into Drupal is basically embedding JavaScript. So I have here a formatter, and what's important is my form API I have attached with a library, and I'm loading my own library, which is basically JavaScript, which gathers a bunch of information and then initializes my Elm application, sending it some information. Basically, in Elm, we have this notion of ports, of if you want to send information from Elm into JavaScript or from JavaScript inside, you have kind of ports, which is interesting because Elm is treating JavaScript the same way you would treat a remote server. There's something that I'm sending out, there's information that I'm getting in. Maybe the information is invalid. I have a failure. So I will have an error. Elm would not have a runtime exception. It will just stop that information that is trying to come. Again, I will be able, from my side, to take care of that. So we don't have a Contenta CMS in Elm, but if somebody here is interested in Elm and would like to pursue this thing, then obviously I would be happy if you want to consult with me on how to start, or send, getting me involved in reviewing pull requests. And what's nice about it is I would not review how you wrote the HTML. I will review, there's one thing, how you model the problem, and from there moving forward is kind of, I don't want to self-explanatory. It is not, but it's very directed. That's it. I've made it exactly on time. So thank you very much.
So, have a question? 何かございます?
All right.
No?
I had one place where I was unclear. The place where you had just
Yeah.
something.
That got me also confused.
What if,
Way longer than I'm willing to admit. So
so what if I put in about 15 instead of just 15?
So the just 15, this is actually, this is part of a type. So you cannot just describe whatever word that we have. In Elm, there is a type that's defined in core, which is defined as a maybe value. And it's saying it's either nothing or it's just whatever information you got over here. So you see the maybe in it over here? So it's very similar to where do we have the success, you see this A thingy we have over here, which is success is actually wrapping some A. What is A? It depends on how you assign it. So a maybe value can basically wrap any kind of record or of time that you have. So just is the opposite of nothing. If you would have written about, it will tell you it's wrong. Did you mean nothing? Because it knows what is the value that you're looking for.
So where was it that you defined that it could only be just? That's the part I missed.
So the just, so here, all right. So by saying that this is a maybe value, it's like I defined a Boolean. I have type Boolean equals true or false. So when we defined maybe, which was already done for us by Elm core, it says For the maybe type, there are actually two values that are acceptable. One is called nothing, literally nothing. The other is called just. So if you want to define something that is the opposite of nothing, you start with the word just, and then you put the value in there.
Okay, so just is part of Elm core that maybe means it can be nothing or just.
Exactly. Here the maybe, it's confusing. Here the maybe is a maybe, and the maybe earlier was not a maybe. No. This is the maybe, this is where you're saying it might have a value or it doesn't have a value, and this is where you actually do the assignment, and you say there is no value. Really, there isn't. There is no nothing. And here you say, seriously, there's something. It's called just, and it's 5. If you would try to put here a string, it will tell you, I'm expecting a number. You have to put it over there. Okay? So basically, the just is wrapping the integer.
And the fact that the word is just is part of Elm core.
Exactly. The same way that a Boolean defines that it can be either true or false, that word are now types that are recognized by Elm.
Why did they choose just?
It's weird, but this is coming from Haskell world.
Okay.
It's coming from Haskell, which is like the grandfather of all those languages.
Gotcha.
So they have this word. It took me, again, that was one of my biggest confusion. What is a just? And like, it's one of those things that the word is so problematic that no matter how you put it in a sentence, it sounds confusing. So I saw another language that instead of just had some. Is it better? I don't know. Yes?
Yeah, some makes sense.
Yeah, the sum? Okay, so it's some. Yes?
Can you put nothing as just zero, like just 50?
So, you could have said just 0. I'm saying that, so that's more, I don't know, a philosophical way of looking at it. But I think...
I'm just talking about how to write.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
instead of nothing, you could have written just 0. But I'm saying that there is a way of, when we have this programming language, this is our user interface as developers to talk with the computer and to pass some intention. I don't know what is, the 0 cooking time for me. Like if I would talk with a friend of mine and he will tell me, how much cooking time do I need to do? I won't tell him cooking time is 0. I will tell him there's no cooking. That's how I speak. That's how I think. When you go to eat ice cream, you don't have 0 cooking time for the ice cream. There's no cooking time, right? So for me, it's being able to describe that thing. Now, if you think about PHP for a minute, is every time you have a variable that you got in, you're doing is not empty or is set. Everybody, okay? There's the company of the is set and the company of not empty. But why are you doing that all the time? Why couldn't I tell you that? Don't worry, 100% you're gonna have that value. But we're used to it. Not empty, not empty, not empty. It would be better for me to describe to you, that value, you might not have it. Oh, if I might not have it, let me change my code accordingly. Again, PHP. But the problem with PHP, I cannot define that thing. So even for things that I know for sure that I have a database connection, I need to check the not empty because maybe I don't have the database connection, right? Maybe it didn't work. So it's actually a maybe value. For me, even when I'm talking with my PHP developers, we're actually kind of doing the Elm modeling, and I'm telling them that value you got, that's a maybe value. So for me, Elm was not just an experience of moving into UI land, into JavaScript land, into something differently. It kind of shifted the way I look into development and changed the expectation I nowadays have from computers. I want the computer, the compiler, to help me understand how to structure, how to write my code.
So friendly to your children.
Sorry?
So friendly to your children.
I think it's friendly. In what you get, again, I don't have those runtime exceptions. I don't have the stress that comes with doing big refactors on fairly big applications.
Do you find any friction in finding talent? Like when
Great
you
question.
hire someone, do you have to teach them Elm, or you only look for people that already know Elm?
Great question. I think that was one of the concerns I had in the beginning of how do I find talent. So my company it's not a big company. We're 15 people, so it's not that we're looking every day for new developers. And there are a few interesting stuff that are related to Elm. So first of all, almost all the developers that are in Elm are seasoned developers, meaning people who got burned from JavaScript and then were telling themselves the same thing that I told myself, there must be a better way. And for me, Elm is kind of the better way. So we hardly have people who just started the way in web development and started Elm. That's one thing. The second thing, and I think this is something that is, I didn't see it recognized enough because this is a question I've been getting a lot, is I found it harder, and I know it's for myself from experience, I found it harder to teach existing JavaScript developer JavaScript. I never understood JavaScript well enough to write applications that were stable enough. I'm just not good enough. I'm saying it. I don't think I'm stupid. I don't think anything. I was just not good enough. And from my perspective, it was also, I couldn't bother with all the minute details that came with JavaScript. So for me with Elm, when I'm throwing a developer to the pool of Elm, I know that the compiler and the type system is there to assist me 24 hours with way more patience than I could give any developer. Again, it's not because I'm not patient. You'd be amazed how patient I am when it comes to the developers, but I cannot check every little thing. So when I start with model the problem, I know that from there, okay, maybe there is which library should I use, how should I write it, but from there, the path is set. So just to make a long answer shorter, I found it much easier to find talent, and also because there's so few Elm companies out there, so few companies using Elm in relation to React. Whenever we're looking for Elm developers, we have quite a bigger pool of people who want to develop for Elm because they have less opportunity than they would have for React. So actually, I have a very positive experience from, hiring Elm developers.
How do you, is that how it works? Do you write stories and this is going to be an Elm thing and this is going to be something else? How do you?
So it's kind of from the same way that Drupal is our weapon of choice, Elm is our weapon of choice. So if it's a really tiny, whatever, just transition the text from blue to yellow, it's going to be JavaScript, jQuery, or, vanilla JavaScript. Whenever there is some interaction, and from my perspective, doing an HTTP request, we just saw how immediately it's thinking about those 4 states. Then I would have an Elm application because we also know that I just need, the client asking for, I just need one single HTTP request ends up with a full-blown semi-decoupled application. I prefer to have it with Elm and, hook it there. So this is kind of the choice that we went. And I have to say that I think, from my perspective, that was one of the best technological decisions that we've taken in Gizra. Yes, last one. Last question. Go ahead. That's the first time you actually listened to my presentation from beginning to end, Matteo.
No, that's not true. Thanks to your presentations, I have explored seriously TypeScript, which is kind of in between JavaScript and Elm. My question was, do your clients feel that they are in a worse position into maintaining themselves the code, or you don't have clients that maintain their code? You always maintain the code that you write for your clients.
So it's a good question. I'm gonna also talk about. I just want to address also the TypeScript. So I think for me, Elm is like what you've done with TypeScript. Elm for me is like just from my perspective is like 3 steps ahead, because you recognize there is JavaScript, there is some problem that you want to fix, and you want to have the type system. And with Elm, we're saying, okay, there's also those idea of side effects. Meaning, for a function that I'm calling, I want to get the exact same result every time, and I don't want to issue an HTTP request and fire missiles by mistake just by calling that function. And this is one of the things that Elm is doing. From my perspective, and this is coming more from, I think, from a business perspective of looking at things, is in the end, I think what the client really wants, that's my belief, is that they want to have the best product that they have, the best product that they can have for the right budget that they are willing to put there. And when I'm coming with my heart full of love to Elm and the experience with that, then I would persuade them that the right way to go would be Elm. We have probably lost a few deals thanks or not thanks to the fact that we didn't want to go with React, because in the end I want to be associated with projects that I feel that have a chance to succeed. I'm not saying that you cannot succeed with React. Of course you can, absolutely. Many companies are way more successful than my company. I'm saying me and the set of developers that we have, and I'm not trying to downgrade, to downsell who we are. I think we're good developers, but I think we are able to reach better things. And this is a concern that clients sometimes have. Sometimes we don't have too many clients that maintain their own code, but we have a few. Up until now, we were able, for the ones that decided to go with us, with that solution, and they were quite happy with Elm itself. So.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Thank you very much.